I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, we talk about Nate Wiggins, the top flight cornerback out of Clemson, being another top 30 visit for the Steelers, what that means, and how we're getting a closer look at who the Steelers will take in the first round, and my top 20 cornerback rankings, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. Let's get right into what we're going to talk about today. Now, the Steelers brought in another group of people. I told you this was going to be a big week for a whole bunch of pre-draft visits. And next week, that will also continue as well. The Steelers getting their pre-draft top 30 guys in. As far as yesterday, the new players included Nate Wiggins, the cornerback out of Clemson, the Rice receiver Luke McCaffrey, related to, of course, Christian McCaffrey and them, Oregon offensive lineman Steve Jones, those being the three players that were brought in on Thursday. Now, Nate Wiggins is the big name there because he's the one that's supposed to go in the first round, and that could be very interesting for the Steelers. But what makes Nate Wiggins even more interesting is that he is now the second to achieve what some people will call the Tomlin Trinity, which every year you're looking at who the Steelers might take in the first round. The trend that everyone has tracked is A, were you a formal interview at the combine? B, did Mike Tomlin and the top brass visit your pro day? And C, were you a top 30 visit? And if you achieve all three of those, you're most likely going to be the first round pick. It's been very rare in the Steelers' recent history that a player who's been picked in the first round has achieved all three of those in their rankings, and he becomes Nate Wiggins becomes the second player to get that Trinity in this draft class. We've talked about it before. Amarius Mims was the first, the tackle out of Georgia, the offensive tackle out of Georgia. So it now starts to look like we're thinning out to see, like, okay, who are the Steelers actually targeting in the first round? Like, there's fun things that we've talked about. Like, for example, Adonai Mitchell, he's a guy there, but Adonai Mitchell didn't get Tomlin in the top brass at the, at his pro day. So, who might be that first round pick? Who's going to get that, that look there the Steelers want to consider? And that's going to be interesting to see, as far as, how the Steelers continue to conduct things. So with looking at that, and we'll talk more about the cornerbacks and the compare and contrast guys in the next few segments, because that's going to be a big part of today's show. But I want to give you a look at who else might be in that quote unquote Tomlin Trinity. I'm not trying to, this isn't nothing new. This is something that everyone, if you cover the Steelers, if you think about the Steelers, if you know about the Steelers draft, this is a trend that's been around for years now. And I'm just calling it the Tomlin Trinity because I like alliteration, because my name's Chris Carter and I always go by CC. So anyways, let's look at other players who could be next up on that list. Guys who have to have this, you already need to have had your pro day with the Steelers brass there, and you needed to be a formal invite, or a formal interview at the combine. And that's why, we ask those questions and we try to track those things, because this helps with trying to predict who's going to go where and who's going to be what. So looking at other players, and we'll go position by position here, there's still a lot of room at cornerback for this to be the case. If the Steelers brought in certain guys for their top 30 visits, you got guys like Terrion Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry. Both were formal interviews at the combine, and both, of course, being in Alabama, the Steelers went there with their top brass. So if either one of those guys are brought in for their top 30 visits, that puts them right on the list as far as achieving the Tomlin Trinity as well. And we know the Steelers are looking heavily at cornerback, so I would throw them in there as well. But I also, other guys that could fit this, Kamari Lassiter, the cornerback out of Georgia, though I do think that Kamari Lassiter, and we'll get into my rankings again, I do think that he's kind of fallen out of the projection for first round cornerbacks. I think that he's more of a second round guy now because of his testing, but still that's something to keep a lookout for with the testing. But one more corner who could very well fall into this, who because of his pro day being so late, is Cooper DeJean, the cornerback out of Iowa, who I'm really excited to see how well he runs. I was hoping that he would be healthy enough for the combine. He wasn't, but he was a formal combine interview. He hasn't been a top 30 visit yet. But if the Steelers brass does go to Iowa for that pro day to see him, that will check the second box there, and then they could do a top 30 visit, and he would be there, and then he would be another person to achieve that Trinity. And again, cornerback being one of the primary concerns for this team, they're going to be looking at all the top options that fit the potential first round there. So those are the guys at the cornerback position, but that's not the only position that could be there. We're also looking a lot, really, really hard, of course, at offensive tackle, where there's other guys that are lined up in similar ways for the Steelers. Other tackles other than Amarius Mims who could fit that. The main one that I'm looking at is J.C. Latham, because he was a formal interview at the combine, and Mike Tomlin and the Steelers brass was at his pro day, and he looks like the other guy that could project to fall down there. Now, two guys that kind of, fall in the David DeCastro realm, whereas like they're out west, so the Steelers don't go as much out there. They'll send like their position coaches out there, are Troy Fautanu out of Washington and Talisa Fuaga out of Oregon State. Now, Talisa Fuaga is a very interesting guy because they have made him a top 30 visit. They talked to him at the Senior Bowl, and they I think they sent their position coaches, Pat Meyer, out to his pro day. So those are two other guys that I think that if you're trying to figure out 4 offensive tackles they could take in the first round that they're looking at, those are the 4: Fuaga, Latham, Fautanu, and Mims. And there's some people that say Fautanu is a guard, but for the sake of looking at that position, these are the players that could be locked in here. And again, Latham's the only one of those 4 that look like he could, or the only one of the 3, I guess, because Mims already has the Trinity. But out of Fautanu, Latham, and Fuaga, he's the only one because he's the only one to get both a combine formal interview and have the Steelers brass at his pro day. That he's the only one that can achieve the Trinity, which if you really believe that that's what's going to be the determining factor, it could make it between Latham and Mims as the Steelers' first round pick at 20 or wherever they trade around at. Now, other players that could fall into that as well, at different positions, it's not as many as you think. And the only other person who I think can officially get that in another position right now is Cedric Van Pran, who was a combine interview, and they were at Georgia naturally for his pro day because they love going to Georgia. And why wouldn't you go to Georgia? He got both of those. If he becomes a top 30 visit, he could be that. But Cedric Van Pran is not projected to be a first round pick, and we're seeing more and more reports out there that the Steelers aren't looking to get a center in the first round. It's why we've been talking about that for weeks here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, trying to get y'all ready for that probability that they're not going center in the first. They're probably going to go center in the second, maybe even the third. Just depends on positional value. It seems like Omar Khan, Mike Tomlin, Andy Weidel, their plan to build this roster is to go get the positions of value and the high value players at those positions early in the draft, and then work on filling their other needs after that, which not a bad plan. That's kind of how, I think a lot of people project to want to build their rosters these days. And it also puts you in a position where you're not drafting positions, players for position of need and passing over higher value players, whereas the Steelers, where granted cornerback is a position of need, but when you're drafting like an Artie Burns, because there was a run at cornerback instead of going and getting the actual best player on the board, that doesn't put you behind an 8 ball and gives you a higher chance at a bust. So with that being said, we're starting to see the field thin out for who the real first round targets are for the Steelers, unless like someone ridiculous falls, like if Olu Fashanu out of Penn State falls down to 20, which some people seem to have him start to doing. I don't think that actually will happen, but I think it's coming down to guys like J.C. Latham, Amarius Mims, Troy Fautanu, Talisa Fuaga, offensive tackle, and then at cornerback, you got a really large group of Terrion Arnold, potentially if he's a top 30. Nate Wiggins is a top 30, so he's a guy there. But Terrion Arnold, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Cooper DeJean, and Nate Wiggins. And I think that Quinion Mitchell's a guy who could also be in that conversation. He hasn't gotten the top 30 invite and wasn't talked to at the combine formally. He was talked to at the Senior Bowl, so maybe the Steelers doing that. But again, Quinion Mitchell, I think everyone's kind of acknowledging like he's not going to fall to 20. I think someone's going to take him pretty early in this draft class. That's just me. But those are the guys that you're looking at right now. So it continues to shape out. The Steelers are looking tackle and corner, and now and you're getting a better look at the names. And who knows, there might be some other names that get thrown in there very soon. But We'll keep you apprised of that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Next, I go through my top 20 cornerbacks. I'll start naming the names off for you and going back and forth about who those players are. And we'll also talk about how important it is to find a guy that fits also for what this depth chart needs right now and for the near future, with Joey Porter Jr. as your number one corner. We'll go over that and a lot more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, that's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our discussions here. Now that we've gone over the top 30 visits and who we're looking at particularly for the first round, let's look closer at cornerback. We've looked at defensive line. We looked at wide receiver. Now we shift to cornerback with some of my rankings there. And I'll show you guys my top 20 list. I am working on finishing my big boards. My latest installments for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette's big board, where I contribute, I believe, off-ball linebacker, edge rusher, corner, safety, and punters. But those positions, if you want to read those, go to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, look up our big board there, and I've been updating that for a bit now. But also now, you're getting closer to the draft. We'll have more updated rankings there. But also, like I said, I'm working on my top 100 list. I'm hoping by next week, or at worst the week after, my top 100 rankings will kind of be out, and you can talk about on this list, and then that can be something that you guys have just to look at and have for your own reference points going into the draft on the 25th. But without further ado, let's get to my cornerback rankings as they are right now. And I want to say these can change, especially because of what I said before in the first segment. Iowa's Pro Day is there's going to be a lot of eyes on Cooper DeJean. How healthy is he? How athletic is he? How fast is he? If he runs at a 4.4 lower, like in the 4.3s, he shoots up the board, I guarantee you Cooper DeJean will be the number one cornerback on people's boards. Pro Football Focus jumped him up to their number one corner even before the pro day, after moving around. So without further ado, right now, this is where I rank these guys. And this, again, could very well change because we don't have a lot of the athletic numbers for Cooper DeJean. But my number one corner is still Quinyon Mitchell because he tested so well. He has a lot of the measurables. I love his tape. But he's probably going to go top 15. That's why I don't think he's falling to the Steelers. After that, though, I am not sure how this first round will play out for these corners, which is why I put my projections as just first round picks for guys like Terrion Arnold, Nate Wiggins, and Cooper DeJean. Now, for those who can't see this because they're listening to this podcast, here's my rankings. Quinyon Mitchell's my number one. Terrion Arnold's my number 2 out of Alabama. Nate Wiggins out of Clemson's my number 3. Cooper DeJean's my number 4 out of Iowa. My number 5 right now is Kool-Aid McKinstry, also out of Alabama. Those are all the guys I project to be most likely the first round picks. Then in the second round, Ennis Rakestraw is my number 6 out of Missouri. Kamari Lassiter is my number 7 out of Georgia. TJ Tampa, my number 8 out of Iowa State. And then Mike Sanders out of Michigan and Jarian Jones out of Florida State are my 9 and my 10. Both I project to be between second and third round guys. Then in the third round, at my 11th, Max Melton out of Rutgers. 12th is Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon. 13th is Andrew Phillips out of Kentucky. 14th is Cam Hart out of Notre Dame. And then kind of splitting between the third and fourth round potentials, I have Elijah Jones at Boston College and Renato Green also of Florida State. Then more guys in the fourth and fifth round type of range. MJ Devonshire out of Pitt, Josh Newton out of TCU, Kalen King out of Penn State, and DJ James out of Auburn. Now, I will admit, past like Kyrie Jackson, I do not have extensive film study on these guys. These is more so like I've seen things here and there, and I've kind of studied like, hey, these are the notes on these guys, these are the numbers, this is where I have them right now. That could also change as well. But for the most part in the middle up to for top 13, like the top 12 or so guys that I have right here. These I'm very comfortable with looking at these guys. I know guys like Kamari Lassiter and Kyrie Jackson didn't test too great, or their 40s weren't great, but I love their tape. I love things that they bring to the table, and I think that they could absolutely help with what the Steelers are looking at right now. Now, again, we're going back through back to the first round guys. I don't know how this is going to shake out as far as where guys will go. Terrion Arnold did not have the fastest 40 time, but he still tested very well in a lot of respects. So how will that hurt his thing? I think that as far as pure cornerback like talent, like as far as a guy that you could trust technically on the outside to just flip his hips, do all the right things, I think that he grades the highest in that department. But when people see Quinyon Mitchell's measurables and see his skills in that department as well, that's why I think that Quinyon Mitchell is going to be valued over him as far as this draft process right now. And I could be wrong. Terrion Arnold could be the first corner off the board. That's, if you guys remember Christian Gonzalez, he was supposed to be the top guy for a while, and things got flipped around with that class last year. So, Joey Porter Jr. was supposed to be a first-round pick. He ended up going to the Steelers in the second last year. It's a thing. It's ever-changing. And again, Cooper DeJean's testing could flip this all upside down, make him the number one guy, and bump guys down. Nate Wiggins, and we talked about him a little bit on yesterday's podcast, even though we were talking primarily about receivers. But Nate Wiggins being a smaller type of cornerback. When I say smaller, I don't mean like tiny. I mean just thin. He's just lighter as a corner. He could be very interesting. It's interesting that the Steelers are taking a closer look at him, because the fact that they shows that they are very willing to look at to look at him despite any questions of his lack of muscle mass, or his weight, his thickness, and being able to take on more physicality, physical receivers in that way. Because when he has a lower weight like he does, and that's what everyone kind of notices at first, like those are the guys that can get bullied off the line. But he has blazing speed to make up for that, great explosiveness. He can turn and run. That's why I think people are willing to overlook that there. Kool-Aid McKinstry, didn't test at the combine. He's been dealing with an injury. And so I think there's people that are kind of like a little hesitant and just like, but the tape on Kool-Aid McKinstry is exciting to watch, and he certainly fits that there. And that's where I think that the first round guys, they can flip all around. Nate Wiggins can go early, he could go later, he can go in the middle part because of his size. Cooper DeJean could change, based off of his pro day. If he runs great, he might be the number one. If he runs okay, maybe I still think he's like, mid first round, maybe, but if he runs like kind of like subpar, maybe he falls to the back, part of the 20s in the first round. That's where I think, Cooper DeJean, but I don't think he gets to like the 30s or slips into the second round unless he runs like a 4.7 or something like that. Or no, not a 4. He won't run a 4.7, but if he runs like a 4.6, maybe he drops to there because people just aren't so sure. But I think Cooper DeJean, a lot of people love his tape and are excited to see him bring it there. So these are my top 20 picks. You can look at them now. And again, I'm going to, these are probably going to shift before draft night, and as I'm getting closer to my top 100 list. But I really think that the first round guys, if the Steelers get one of these guys, this guy could be, any one of those guys could be Joey Porter Jr.'s partner for the next 5 to 8 years. Like that could be, you could have a 1-2 punch at corner as long as they come in and they perform how they project, at least on tape, and what they look like coming into the draft process. I think that puts the Steelers in a good position for the cornerback position to be solid for some years to come. But if they don't get a corner, because we've acknowledged like, hey, they might go offensive tackle, they might go receiver in the first round. Let's look at these guys in the second and third and fourth rounds, guys that they could take there. I think it's going to be interesting to look at how these guys fit, because particularly the Steelers, they're in a position where they got Dante Jackson, so technically they don't need their rookie corner they draft in this draft to be a starter right away. They can come in, learn behind Dante Jackson, and eventually become the number 2. Or if they draft a slot option as their corner in the middle rounds, that could also be another way to get them on the field. But I want to talk about those options and what might be the best fit for next to Joey Porter Jr. That and more here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal information. Claim comes of quarter one in 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold for 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue our show here talking about the cornerbacks list, and I'll bring my list up here for those who, keep going back and forth about the names, and some of you guys like to do the mock drafts, and don't forget we will have mock draft Monday for the Monday episode, so I'll post something about that over the weekend in the Locked On Steelers Facebook group, as well as on my Twitter at Carter Critiques. But let's get back to what I'm talking about here as far as fits. Now, some of these guys in this list we've talked about, and I think I talked about more about this with Alan too earlier this week. Guys like Max Melton could be in the slot, but also could line up outside. But Mike Sanders still is more like a pure slot. I think Terrion Jones is another guy out of Florida State who projects to be a really athletic slot type of guy. And that position should not be overlooked. And I think the more and more that we continue to see the NFL develop with passing games and everything, and how people are reacting to it, and what kind of positions that they're targeting on defense to counter passing games, the slot cornerback is becoming more and more important. And that's something that I think that the Steelers are very aware of. Granted, you're not drafting a slot corner in the first unless they are like also a safety, also an outside corner, a guy that can give you a positional flexibility. But if you're a really good slot corner and you project to be, a guy that can get you interceptions, blitz the quarterback, help against the run, that's also a very useful piece in the middle part of a defense, and it's something to keep an eye on. So again, guys like Mike Sanders still, guys like Max Melton, guys like Terrion Jones, those are all guys I can see flexing around and playing in there. And there's a few others in there as well. I got to finish my research on some of the guys that are projected to be like third round and beyond guys, as far as these players. But again, looking at for the best fit for Joey Porter Jr., I think it depends on what the Steelers want to get with him, because Joey Porter Jr., he is a press man. Put him in front of somebody, line him up. He's looking at the receiver. He's not looking at the cornerback. He's playing less. So he is taking away the guy in front of him. Do the Steelers want to get another cornerback that's just like that? Dante Jackson's a lighter guy too. He's not a guy who's going to line up in front of a guy and jam him up and control him. He's more fat. He's going to try to, run with them, keep, use spacing, use distance, and be able to turn and run with them and use his athleticism to make up any ground. But do the Steelers want to get another guy that could play the way Joey Porter Jr. does? Well, if you do, you probably want to get one of those guys in the first round. Nate Wiggins is more of a lighter guy like Dante Jackson. But like a Terrion Arnold, a Quinion Mitchell, even a Cooper DeJean, I think that he could play there. Kool-Aid McKinstry, and it's Rakestraw. Those are guys that I can see playing that role and fitting it well. I also think Kyrie Jackson could be in that conversation. He didn't test too great at the combine, but I liked his tape. I loved him at the Senior Bowl. I loved the things that I've seen of him and how he is really sticky on wide receivers. And we know that the Steelers have been kind of looking for that prototype cornerback. And I wonder if that is kind of like the peeking at their hand in a card game that we've seen for the Steelers. For the Steelers cornerback wants is to find that other guy that's just basically another version of Joey Porter Jr., who's like 6'1", 6'2", 6'3", long arms, and can run, but it doesn't have to be the fastest guy out there, but can play physical and be that other guy that plays that man shutdown type of corner style. So you can just say, hey, you guys take away the top two receivers. The defense, the rest of the defense will just worry about the rest of that. Minka Fitzpatrick will do his roaming thing. You got Patrick Queen and the linebackers. They can be aggressive. The pass rush can just go pass rush. that makes a lot of sense. And you see teams like the Browns, Myles Garrett, huge part of the defense, but who's also a huge part of the defense? Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome. Those guys, having cornerbacks that can just erase people off the field, it is so huge for what you want to do in today's NFL. It takes when you can trust those guys to win regularly, that does so much for your defense. Even back in the last great Steelers defensive days where the Steelers were ranking number 1 in defense for 4 out of 5 years. You look at what Ike Taylor did. Ike Taylor didn't get a whole lot of interceptions, but you know what he did? He took away top wide receivers. Go look up Chad Ochocinco's numbers when he went up against Ike Taylor. Ike Taylor destroyed that man. Well, I wouldn't say destroyed, but he shut him down. He took him I remember years where Ochocinco would come in and he had a checklist where he'd be like, "Oh, I got this guy. I killed this corner. I killed this corner." And every time he got to Ike Taylor, it was like, "Not today." And that's the kind of, I think that's who the Steelers wants to get, another guy like that. Ike Taylor worked out as a 4th-round pick that developed into that shutdown guy. Joey Porter Jr., a higher pick. I think that in today's NFL, corners that can do that kind of stuff, they're being recognized faster and faster, and their value is going up and up. And so the Steelers need to invest earlier picks to get those guys. And I think that this front office recognizes that. That's why we're seeing the closer looks at the cornerback class, the closer looks at the tackle class, the positions that are considered the value positions in the NFL based off of what they're being paid, their contributions, and how things work out over time. That's where I think the Steelers, are focusing on trying to get a guy with Joey Porter Jr. And again, look at the guys that they're hoping to develop that are currently on their roster. You look at Corey Trice. You look at Darius Rush. Those type of guys that are on the Steelers depth chart right now. They're longer guys that if they grow into it, that can be their role for the cornerback position. So I really think that when you look at guys like that, you start to see a picture for, hey, the Steelers would love to get these types of corners. Big, physical, long, can run and stick with big name wide receivers, and especially in their division where they're going to have to go up against Jamar Chase probably for the next decade or so. They're going to have to someone's going to have to stick Zay Flowers, though he's a smaller guy, but still, that's a big name wide receiver you got to deal with. Amari Cooper's still in your division. There's talent, and there's new wide receivers coming in every single year. As much as we're talking about, oh, you should be excited about guys like Adonai Mitchell. What if the Bengals took him or something like that? What if the Ravens took him? What if the Browns took him? I mean, the Browns, I'm going to have a 1st-round pick for a while, so I don't think they would have a shot at him. But point being, what if an AFC North team took him, or just a team that you got to get through? You need corners that can stick with those guys, and every year there's new wide receivers coming in. Next year's wide receiver class could be crazy as well. I haven't even begun to look at that. But point being, I think the Steelers do want one of those guys on the outside. The question is, where do you get them? And if this is why also, I'm talking about the center position and saying, hey, I'm not seeing it being the 1st-round pick, because you really want to get a tackle that one of the tackles we've gone over in the early parts of this draft, and a corner. If you could get one of these guys here, it could solve that position for you for years. And then that way there's less pressure on needing Corey Trice or Darius Rush to work out, because if they do, great, you have value, and then you can see who you want to keep for the long term and who you want to pay the big bucks to. But if you don't, guess what? You drafted Cooper DeJean or Terrion Arnold or whoever, and that person's the partner next to Joey Porter Jr., and you don't got to worry about that. And I've said cornerback could be one of the positions they double dip at to get an outside guy and a slot guy this year. And we've talked about some of those slot options. Don't forget, one person I keep saying is a slot option that won't be listed on here because they're not officially a cornerback is Tyke Smith out of Georgia. I love his tape when he mirrors wide receivers out of the safety position when he lines up in the slot. He's another guy. He's another guy. I believe. I don't think he was a top 30 visit, but I believe they talked to him at the Senior Bowl, and they also, because Mike Tomlin that goes to Georgia's pro days, he was at his pro day. So Tyke Smith is another guy I have a circle around for maybe a 3rd or 4th round pick for the Steelers. For that would be very good value for what they could use him for in the Steelers defense. But point being, I still think the Steelers are looking for that bigger outside corner and the slot option in this draft. And the question will just be, where can they get that value versus guys like the offensive tackles? And as we get through the next couple of weeks, that's where I'm going to start putting together the ranking and comparisons of where I put the tackles versus the corners as far as their value. Because if you ask me right now, Terrion Arnold or J.C. Latham, I have feelings, but I can't give you a definitive yes or no there that I can't promise that I wouldn't change if as I go and compare more of my notes and I'm putting my top 100 together. But hey, that's why this is a draft process. That's why we keep studying this, and that's why I'm honest with you guys throughout the whole draft process. There were times last year where I was like, hey, I'm not so sure about this tackle versus that tackle, and then when we got like to mid-April, I was like, oh no, Broderick Jones is that guy. Like I think that they're going to trade up to get him, and then that's exactly what they did. But it's just all part of the process as we're learning. I hope you're learning with me, and I hope that you're enjoying learning with me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. If you're enjoying the show, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts with a positive comment. That stuff really helps out the show. Also, shout out to all the people who accepted the roles of the assignment, the volunteer roles of moderators. We have 12 new moderators in Locked On Steelers Facebook group, so we're hoping to get the spam out, the craziness out, and it's going to be working there. I know there were a lot of people who volunteered, and I just kind of picked through, saw people that either I knew I've interacted with for years, or just got people that tracked well and didn't start fights with a lot of people. So we're going to have that, and I hope that helps people enjoy the group more, because I know there were a lot of complaints about that, but y'all see your boy got a lot of jobs. I've been writing about Pitt basketball players going to the NBA draft, and Pitt football players getting ready for the NFL draft. Also Pitt football players doing the spring practices. Also Steelers free agency and Steelers draft and this show and this PG show and Channel 11 and all of that. So hope that I hope y'all understand why it takes some time to look at a Facebook group and see what's going on there. But we got those moderators back. Thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great weekend. I'll be back Monday here for Mock Draft Monday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. See you here. I'm Chris Carter. Have a great weekend.